What is the creepiest/strangest thing that has happened to you or a friend or family member that creeps you out to this day? Story 1. Kidnapping attempt in the 1980s. Sacramento neighborhood, late at night, visiting a friend when I was maybe 9 to 10 years old. 3 of us walk out to go play at this par/elementary school several blocks away at around 10 p.m. at night. We were playing frisbee in the street in front of the school, and our frisbee lands in the street as a white van pulls up and stops, as if to allow us to get our frisbee. I walked toward the van and grabbed the frisbee, then moved to the side to allow the van to pass. As the van passed, the sliding door opened, and a guy dressed in black like a ninja came flying out and tried to grab me. He had a harness on, and the van had been rigged with a telescoping mechanism that allowed him to come out around 5 feet while hanging from this harness, like they do in some haunted houses where people appear to be flying, and it was operated by another person inside also dressed in black. So there was at least 3 people involved in this attempt. I barely dodged his attempt to grab me, and all 3 of us ran toward the elementary school and hopped the fence about 6 feet tall, ran along the fence, through the bushes, and then hopped a second fence, about 15 feet maybe, that allowed us to be inside the school. We were scared as hell and could hear the van driving around and assumed they were in hot pursuit. We found a way to get onto the roof of the school from the inside, thank God, and proceeded to observe the van driving around the school for at least 30 minutes in an obvious attempt to find us. This scared us even more because one would think the would-be kidnappers would flee, but I suppose they thought we could identify them. This was before cell phones, so we stayed up there until about around 45 minutes after we last saw them. It appeared some of them were searching for us on foot also, which added to the fear. We eventually escaped and went back to my friend's house and never told anyone in our family out of fear of being punished. First off, good move running and hiding. Now, I don't think anyone watching this is young enough for this to be an issue, but if you are, or if you have kids one day, tell people about stuff like this. The sooner you tell some adults, the sooner others can be warned. Get the cops and neighborhood on lookout for white vans, suspicious people, stuff like that. If you have kids, let them know that they will never be in trouble for telling you about something like this because you need to know when this is happening. It could save a life. Story 2. Lived in the Hollywood Hills, and this happened in the early 80s. Crazy knocking at my door at 9 p.m. I go to answer the door, and there's a lady there just hysterical, talking about, "There's so much blood." She looks normal and is dressed in clean clothing, so we let her in. She tells a story about seeing someone get stabbed. I call the police, and 2 uniformed LAPD officers arrive in 10 minutes. They take the lady away and tell us that she was reported missing, has a mental condition, and lives up the street. All good. 30 minutes later, another knock at the door. 2 different cops arrive this time, responding to the call. They have no idea who the other 2 cops were. Take our information and statements, description of the officers and the lady as well. Radio conversations back and forth ensue, and they really don't have any idea how any other cops could have picked her up, because they were given the call 40 minutes ago. If this isn't the start of a movie with some creepy conspiracies in it, I don't know what is. Do you think they were actually cops and a mix-up was figured out later that the OP never heard about, or was there something else going on there? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. Story 3. Well, I'm late, but whatever. So about 2 years ago, I was in my room reading a book when I hear it. Soft as ever, 2 little girls giggling. Not just any giggle. It was the kind of giggling you hear in horror movies. I immediately put down my book and listened. After about a minute of holding my breath, I decided it must have come from outside. Then that night, just as I'm about to drift off to sleep, I hear it again. 2 little girls giggling. Now, it was 2 a.m., and I was pretty damn sure there weren't 2 little girls outside my window at that time of night, so I began to freak out. I sat up in my bed and waited for what felt like forever just listening. Then I hear it again. I jump out of my bed and go spend the rest of the night in the guest room. By the next morning, I was convinced my room was haunted. For the next week, I avoided my room and spent my nights in the guest room unbeknownst to my family. I was afraid to tell anyone for fear I was going crazy or they wouldn't believe me. But every time I spent more than an hour in my room, I would hear those 2 little girls giggle. By the end of the week, I was a mess. I could barely sleep and was terrified of my room. Then one morning, my brother walks up to me and says, "You deaf or something?" Obviously, I was confused, and after further questioning, he tells me about this small device he had placed in my room. Apparently, it's like some sort of prank device that's easily hidden and can make a variety of different noises. My brother, however, chose the creepy as F little girl's giggling sound. He wondered why I hadn't heard it or said something all week, and I just wanted to punch him in the face. So my room wasn't haunted after all. Moral of the story? Sometimes your brother is just an a-hole. Then you ran to your parents to tell on your brother. Mom, Dad, my brother is being a jerk. He put this thing in my room to mess with me, and it was scaring me all week. Then your parents look at each other confused, then back to you, and Dad goes, Kiddo, you don't have a brother. Story 4. When I was 6, 28 years ago, my mom and dad took me and my younger sister to an MLB game, leaving my grandmother to babysit my youngest sister. When we got back, my grandmother told my folks that 2 guys had come by the house with photography equipment and asked whether a young girl with red curly hair lived there, and that they had spotted her and that she would be a great child model for some advertising work they were doing. When my grandmother said she wasn't home, they said they would be back another time. My grandmother and mom didn't think much about it, but my dad said, something's not right here, and called the police. 15 minutes later, several FBI agents showed up and began conducting interviews with my grandmother and my parents while I ran around and showed the agents my Matchbox police helicopter. Turns out we had been targeted by a child theft ring. The photographers would take a bunch of photos and wait until the toddler threw a tantrum, and the photographers would then ask the mother to go grab a toy to keep the child entertained. While the mother was out of the room, they would grab the child and bolt, leaving everything else behind. The FBI told my folks that my sister had already been sold and would have been out of the country within 24 hours if they got her. We were advised to change preschools and other aspects of our daily routines. It still gives me chills to think about what could have happened to her. Needless to say, Mom became pretty overprotective. It was a few years before she even trusted us with a babysitter. Edit. Thread police are calling BS on my story. That's fine, and I don't much care because I don't do this for karma. View my nearly 1-year history and post for confirmation. I will say that certain facts may have been conveyed to me with slight exaggerations. FBI probably did not respond in 15 minutes, but it was same day and during daylight hours. But it does not make the essence of the story any less true. We're just fortunate that everything worked out. I'm going to go ahead and believe the OP and say that that is absolutely terrifying to hear. How could people be such absolute monsters as to target and sell toddlers? It feels like every time I think humans can't get any worse, some new freaking degenerates show up to claim the prize of humans least deserving of breathing. Be careful who you trust and let in your home, folks. Story 5. I worked with a lady once who was pretty old, I'd say around 70 years old. Since our job was pretty boring, we talked a lot and she had all kinds of crazy stories. But this one creeps me out still. She said when her grandma died, they had her buried in a wood box in the backyard as it was pretty custom in those days. Well, years later, they have a family plot in a cemetery and decide to dig her grandma up to move her to the family plot. She said when they took the lid off the coffin, it had claw marks all over the inside. The grandma had apparently been buried alive. Story 6. My best friend and I were having a sleepover at her house. We were teenagers, and for some reason we were home alone. We were goofing off upstairs when suddenly we hear a crash downstairs. We, of course, freak out for maybe 30 minutes before we get the nerve to go check it out. I grab a bat and we slowly creep down the steps. In the kitchen, we find a glass bowl had fallen and broke, but the real creepy part is that all the pieces had been picked up and put in another bowl on the table. We still have no idea how that happened. Another time with the same friend, we decided it would be fun to sleep outside in my friend's parents' camper. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the silhouette of some guy standing in the doorway. He stands for a minute and then walks out. I was still half asleep and wondering if that really happened when I fell back to sleep. The next morning, my friend tells me about her dream that she had about someone coming into the camper. Of course, freaking out ensued. Apparently someone, a hobo perhaps, she lives right next to the tracks, had been sleeping there without anyone knowing. Oofda, 2 stories in a row that could have had way worse outcomes than they did. I'm glad everything turned out okay. First lesson we're all learning here is lock your campers, folks, though I guess I would need to buy one first. A second lesson I'll say is call the police if you can. Don't explore the house yourself with a baseball bat. You don't know if an intruder has a gun or something. If you can't call, lock doors, escape out a window if you can, and avoid danger. Story 7. Okay, so I'm at Walmart standing in front of the French bread. Notice this strange guy standing there staring at the food. About 40 years old, jean shorts, little overweight, handlebar mustache, tight shirt, flip-flops. I pick up one loaf of bread and he turns to me with a strange smile. Walk away from creepyf.jpg. After a while, 30 minutes or so, I change my mind and go back to the bread aisle, and this dude is still standing in the same spot, just staring. So I put the bread back. He immediately grabs it, the one I just put down, and storms to the cash register, pays, and leaves. That is the only thing he bought. What the hell? Edit, spelling and grammar. Edit 2. Yeah, I am from Europe, but I live in California right now. I cannot make crap like that up. I'm here to say, I think that guy was just on drugs. Full on zoning out, losing track of time, tripping out of his mind. That bread was overwhelming, and when you got back, he realized, oh crap, how long have I been here? This looks so suspicious. Quick, buy something and leave before she calls the cops. Oh, I'll act like I was waiting for the bread she had. That's why I was here. That makes perfect sense. I can't guarantee that is what happened, but I would be willing to bet on it. Story 8. This whole thing was probably just a coincidence, but it still freaks me out. I was waiting at the bus stop around 2 years ago and just started chatting with this lady who was waiting for a different bus. It was just a normal conversation, but there was an odd undertone that I just could barely make out, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I don't know what it was, but I know it was there. Finally, my bus comes and I get on, and I'm the only one there. All of a sudden, I hear, "Hey!" I glance up, and there's a little girl who says, "Remember me?" She reminded me strangely of the woman I was speaking with at the bus stop, but younger. You could cut the tension with a knife, and when I got off, I swear she watched me as the bus left. It was probably just a coincidence, but I'm certain that I was the only one on the bus when I got on. Honestly, though, it still freaks me out a little bit today. Edit, little girl probably wasn't the best phrase. She was most likely around 11 to 12. It's common for kids to ride the bus to or from school. Story 9. I have a story that didn't happen to me, but rather my friend's dad. This guy isn't the type to BS, so I believe him 100%. My friend's dad, we'll call him Jack, and his brother, we'll call him Tom, lived with each other in the 80s. It was just the two of them living in the house, no one else. So this one night, Jack is coming home at night and walks into his living room to see a bunch of old people sitting around talking. As he walks in, they all just quiet down and awkwardly look at him as he walks by. He doesn't see Tom anywhere, so he just assumes Tom will be back to tend to his guests. Jack has work the next morning, so he goes into his room to get some sleep, but is kept up from all the people talking. He walks out from his room and is promptly met up with Tom, who is coming out of his room to tell Jack to keep his friends quiet. However, Jack was coming out to tell Tom to keep his friends quiet. They walk out from the hallway into the living room only to see that it's empty, with a leftover smell of musk. Story 10. I've told this story before. When I was 15, my stepfather got stabbed right in front of me. There was an altercation in the middle of our street at 2 in the morning that woke our whole house up. My stepfather and my uncle were still up drinking and went outside to see what was going on. There was a young man kicking the crap out of one of our older neighbors, an alcoholic gentleman who lived a few houses down from us. I found out afterward the young man was dating the older man's daughter. My stepfather and uncle went out to break it up, and in the commotion, my stepfather was stabbed by the guy. He stumbled back onto the porch and fell, and I tried to catch him. His blood smeared down the front of my shirt. The younger guy took off, and we called 911. We were in the hospital until the early morning. When me and my mom got home, there was a message on our answering machine. It was a friend of mine from school crying and apologizing for calling in the middle of the night, but she had just had a dream that there was screaming and a fight, and I was covered in blood. She begged me to call her back. The timestamp on the message was the same time as a stabbing. This is in the late 80s, before computers and even cell phones, really. I lived on the other side of town from her. There was no way she could have known what had happened. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.